only 20 minutes, we'll see. I've gone through about 4 drafts, one in which I wrote on Friday because none of the other ones were quite good enough. So I will try my best not to keep my head in, in my words. But to start off, there are so many aspects of my life that astound me. Don't get me wrong. I am astounded by other people's generosity and wisdom and their strength constantly. But to really think about my own existence is almost an insurmountable idea. I think there's a visceral nature to reality that I find both incredibly acute and just ridiculously surreal. And so I struggle to honor one of the most real experiences that I've ever had, and that has been finding community. And well, what can really anyone say about finding community or finding that connection that actually conveys what it means to you on the inside? But before I try to talk about community and what it means to me, I think it's an important idea that you get my experience for how I found community and how it plays into my life. So here's the story. We're going to start at the end, though. So it's June 2016. It's performance day for Desert Voices. It's my first time conducting real people with a real crowd, real consequences if I mess it up, and real anxiety about that. Real anxiety about that. So there are 5 gala choruses, and I'll get to what gala is in a second. Desert Voices is a gala chorus. So there's 5 gala choruses who are supposed to get together, and we're going to celebrate our joy, our pride, our love for one another, our love for music. And I'm supposed to make my conducting debut. It's a pretty important day. However, when I woke up, as I said, it was June, but it was June 12th, 2016, and 49 people were dead. 49 LGBTQ people had been gunned down at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. So many were injured, and there were threats of gun violence and scares all through LA Pride, and we've been told there'd been additional security for us to make sure that we were safe, just in case. However, just in case is kind of a terrible reality. And it wasn't that the atmosphere didn't remain positive. I don't think we could help be positive. We all gathered together to do what we loved to do. But there was something underneath, a solemn undercurrent or a nervous energy. And it was more than, at least in my opinion, it was more than just performance anxieties. It didn't really feel like the thousands of miles between us and LA or the thousands of miles between us and Orlando were really that far at all. And so I thought, well, the ideals of love and compassion are supremely persistent, and we have love and compassion here. But then I also thought, divisiveness, like hatred and callousness, are also pervasive. The fragility of human life kind of remains the same in all of these things. And so I asked myself, going into this performance, would we be safe? Did anyone in little old blue blip of Tucson do something like this? And I thought back to my junior year of college, the first time. In 2011, I thought to Gabby Gifford. And one of her interns, Daniel Hernandez, who had held her hand and had held something to her head to try to stop the bleeding after she'd gotten shot. He'd been in my class the previous semester. So yes, it absolutely could happen here in Tucson. It already did. Would our audience think the same things? Would they be as worried as we were? Would they have the same fears? Would they come to the concert, or would they decide that they would stand in solidarity from a distance? Then I also wondered, would I regret getting my mom, a ticket to come see me? She was driving down from Goodyear. It's a 2.5-hour drive. And she really wanted to be there. I really wanted her to be there, but I was like, do I want her here if I can't keep her safe? And ultimately, I thought to myself, as a member of Desert Voices, someone who not willingly, as if I didn't have a choice or fought it in some way, but if I had entered into an ensemble that was supposed to represent those who could not represent themselves, who else was going to do it? And so I also thought the reality of joining Desert Voices is that there's always been some sort of guarantee, not that there would be violence or hatred or fear, but that there could be hatred or violence or fear. I felt the necessity of us representing ourselves fully for those who could no longer for the rest of their lives, and for those who didn't have the courage was the most important thing. And so when it came time to perform, it was a wonderful experience. I don't think I've ever felt as connected to an ensemble as I did that day, though arguably Desert Voices seems to challenge that all the time. But I just felt so connected. And so when it did finally come time for me to conduct, we had a tiny little tenor and bass section, much smaller than we have now. And they looked up at me, ready to go, and the rest of the ensemble looked up at me. There was like nervousness, fear. It was a very quiet beginning. There was a lot of fear, anticipation, a little bit of sadness for the topic of the song we were singing and for the day, and determination to do it justice. And so I realized that in my journey through life, through music school, through singing, it was not the skill or experience I'd gained along the way, which obviously was very important, but it was this specific experience, this ability to connect with everyone in the ensemble, each and every one. I think I made eye contact with everyone. It was a realization that I was part of this huge community, and that this performance, good or bad, big or small, was my community. It was our purpose and our intention that was the focus of everything. It could happen just as easily in a different city with a different LGBTQ ensemble. It can happen for anyone finding this community in this moment. We were representing the shared collective and the shared history of all the people that we were representing. We were ambassadors of our truth and honesty, our pride, our hope, resistance, perseverance. I sound like a quote board on Pinterest. So I didn't think about my conducting, not once. I thought of all of the rehearsals that led up to this journey. I thought of the journey in and of itself, the journey of the singers, the journey of the audience, hopefully, most importantly, the journey of me and the singers who were singing in that moment, the journey we were going on in the present. And where did I go? Yeah, I did turn the page. And so I remember now. I walked off stage a very, very different person. I had a very different lens of awareness and kind of an understanding of where my niche was in life, regardless of whether or not that applied to anyone else. And that all of the things I'd worked for in my craft and my musicianship just didn't really matter. Obviously they matter, but they didn't really matter when it came to creating community and empowering people to feel as I felt in that moment. And I don't think until that day that I'd realized that I'd been searching for a community or that I'd found one. So that's the end of the story. Finding community, seeing with Desert Voices, woo-woo. But so now as we stand just a couple days after the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, there's so much to be said about how community came from that. There's really so much to be said about the Stonewall riots and that kind of explosion of resistance to oppression and abuse and neglect. There's so much to be said about the AIDS crisis and the inhumane and just cruel way that the government and society treated anyone with AIDS, especially in the LGBT community. And there's so much to say about the struggles we faced and the struggles that we will continue to face until eventually we will find our equality. However, of all the responses, obviously as a musician, the one I'm most connected to is the Gala Choruses movement. And so Gala, as you've heard me say a couple of times, is the Gay and Lesbian Association of Choruses. It's like a choral professional society. It helps Gala choruses grow, learn how to recruit, hire people, all the professional things that you need to have a successful chorus. And so now there are hundreds of Gala choruses all across the country, internationally. I think one of my favorite performances was a German chorus. I think they were dressed as vampires in dark, dark hoods. And when they did their dance moves, they revealed sparkly, sparkly pink sequins underneath. Highlight of my life, let me tell you. And so as Gala choruses come up, and now that there are different types of choruses, they're really starting to make an impression on our national chorus platform. The American Choral Directors Association, Chorus America, so on and so forth. This idea of diversity is starting to creep in slowly. You're seeing a rise in the idea that voice parts aren't defined by gender, and gender is not defined by appearance or biological sex, that music is not determined, that good music is not determined by complexity, and that the success of your chorus and the value and the sound are not defined by this idea of prestige or perfection or seriousness, but they're really defined by humanity and genuineness. And it's starting to catch on very slowly, but very surely. And as I've begun my journey into the world of Gaelic choruses, I direct the Phoenix Women's Chorus. I'm assistant director of the lovely Desert Voices, which we have a few members of. And I've started working here in this wonderful UU congregation. I found it necessary to really think about and find and evaluate what it means to me to have community and how I often stand as a face or a spokesperson for my community. And so as we go in to a little bit more about me, I'll tell you that in finding community, particularly the LGBTQ community, it wasn't really that I didn't have any queer or LGBTQ influences growing up. That is to say, I had none. But I feel like there are a few ways in which my otherness manifested itself. So firstly, I come from a slightly atypical family. The majority of my family, my aunts and uncles, were all born in the 50s or before. But despite that, or maybe in spite of that, I was raised to be independent and strong-willed. Emphasis on strong-willed. I was raised to see girls and women as no different than boys in terms of what they could do and what their roles in life were. And I was told that I needed to work for what I wanted, work for until I had it for as long as it took, which I work a lot. And I was never really concerned about what other people expected of me. And it has never really influenced, I'm really lucky, that has never really influenced different aspects of my life. I do what I want, literally. Secondly, I was always told that I was beautiful. And while I think I prefer the term handsome, either way, there's never been any time in which I thought a man's opinion of me mattered, just for the sake of being a man. One of my mentors is a man. He's wonderful. I care very much what he thinks. But in the general scheme of things, I've never thought that a man's opinion of me can take me down. And I've also kind of subsequently never really felt that aesthetics were a large part of where I derived my value. I like to dress nice, but I like to dress nice because I like what I see in the mirror and not with the expectation that I'm expected to dress a certain way. Though, I wear a dress to something and everyone dies. They're like, what are you doing? And so the third thing was I was never a typical kid in the school system. The ideas of eye contact and gender were just not things that I cared about. I trained myself a little bit to stare at people in the eye because it showed that I valued their opinion and they felt heard and understood. Now sometimes I stare too long. So I might stare too long and make bad small talk, or I might make bad small talk and not look at you in the eye at all. I apologize. And the second thing attached to that, gender, I've never really felt solidly female or male. It continues to not be a thing I think about. I don't care. I have my name. It represents who I am. My last name is Waigwa, and it's going to look really good with the prefix doctor in front of it. And then lastly, I was raised by a native Panamanian and a native Kenyan who accents persist till this day. Most cashiers still cannot understand my father. Sometimes I can't either. And I was never really raised with the idea of being an American or associating myself with a specific race. And so I just don't get race as much as other people. To me, it's like Disneyland, a lot like Disneyland. I don't get it. It's not the happiest place on earth. I love the rides. It's fun, fast-paced, and exciting, but I'm not buying into it. It's this weird capitalist gimmick where you're trying to sell me things, and I'm like, no, thanks, I'll pass. To me, gender and ethnicity they are what they are, and they're not what anyone tells you that they are. And I remember I went to an upper middle class white elementary school, and in this school, being surrounded by majority white people, I don't know that I knew what race was for a long time. My mother, we didn't talk about it. My family is a mix of different colors. Everyone who looks at our family portraits goes, oh, I don't know how all those shades got in there. They did. And so growing up with, my mother was my primary caretaker. And so when she would talk about things, she would talk more about class. And she was raised quite well in Panama. So I had good manners, so I could blend in everywhere. It didn't matter if we had any money. And then when it came to my dad, I knew he'd experienced some kind of racism throughout his life, but I never connected it with the color of his skin. I just thought that my dad ran into way more jerks than my mom. Way more jerks than my mom. And so it wasn't until I was in about 7th grade, I think, registering for middle school, that I realized that race was a thing that people were categorized and boxed into. And it was because I was signing up forms for my first day of school. I just moved. And there were boxes that said, like, pick your ethnicity and pick your race. And it said pick one. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm half Panamanian and half African, or half Latino American and half African American. Where does that leave me? Like, if we're supposed to fit in these little boxes and none of the boxes fit, how much can the boxes matter? Yeah. So it was a fantastic moment. I remember looking up at my mom and being like, well, which one should I be? And she said, well, which one do you want to be? And I was like, oh. So in middle school, I was black. And in high school, I was Hispanic. I figured there was a compromise. So navigating through adolescence and education, these were my othernesses. And then I went to my first Desert Voices rehearsal. I'd been a closeted singer my whole life. I'd always wanted to sing, but I didn't think you could get better at it, because I didn't start singing until I joined Desert Voices. That was a fun rehearsal. But so I remember walking in, and I saw big, burly men being very feminine. And I remember singing. I sat next to a trans man who was in the alto section with me. I remember female tenors, and I discovered the stereotype of flannel and Birkenstocks, and I love it very much. I remember seeing men in drag. I remember seeing a non-binary folk, or butch. And we sang together because it wasn't our differences that made up the chorus. And it was later that I realized that we came together as a group. A lot of things I didn't realize, but I didn't realize until later that we came together as a group that sort of rejected all of these societal norms and all of these specific boxes that we were delegated to by our appearance or by our gender or whatever it may be. And in this course, there were no rules, there were no categories, there was no line in the sand. As long as you came in at your entrance and you cut off when you were supposed to and didn't let your linger, you were pretty much okay. We were people who saw each other and didn't judge each other on anything we were supposed to be. We saw each other as we were, and we met each other where we were. And so in soaking up this beautiful kind of utopian ideal of what a community should be, it really shielded me and allowed me to grow a lot more through, I don't know, my 19s to I'm not out of my 20s. I can't give you a big age range. But it really allowed me to grow into who I was because, again, as the non-eye contact person, I wasn't going out talking to all these people. The people I was talking to were in this little community. And so I really didn't have judgment. And it further emphasized that this Disneyland ideal of what things are supposed to appear like and what they actually are, and it just skated over me. And I could continue to grow in my otherness in everywhere else in the world, but I always had my space. And so finding common ground and community and all of this has been so powerful and transformative. And I don't think, back to what I was saying before, I don't think that you can really define what that is. You can't define the depths to which you can feel community, so much as that you can just feel it. And so out of this struggle, back to Stonewall, out of this struggle came the Gaelic Choruses movement, came the very visible expression of community. And Stonewall was the impetus for that. It took the people who were previously invisible and it made them visible. And despite being attacked and being abused, they were able to be visible for those that needed someone who was visible, and whether or not that meant that it spurred someone into coming out way earlier, or spurred someone into finding people who were like-minded, or stayed in the closet for a long time. Stonewall was sort of like the glimmer of hope that started everything, through which we go through now. And I realized that despite the growing awareness in society, there's still a fine layer of Disneyland bullshit that continues across. And so as we start to bridge differences, as we start to get to the point where we can bridge differences, where we're willing to recognize that there are differences, I think music is our biggest glimmer of hope. We can go out and do our individual actions that help people or that help ourselves through helping others. But music has this universal quality of connecting us. There's a reason why in France, after bombings, they all sang Imagine. And it didn't matter that they didn't necessarily speak English. They spoke Imagine. They spoke through the words of John Lennon. And it makes us feel and connect with the artists making music, any artists. And it takes us outside of ourselves, and we can feel familiar and empathetic or sympathetic with the lives of others. And it takes us out of what we should feel and how we should think and what we should do, and really, really tells us how we feel, what we do, and how we think through someone else. So regardless of who you are, how you present, what your past is, and what you want your future to be, music makes you move. It makes you close your eyes and really enjoy what your ears are making you feel. It makes you laugh, cry with one another. It makes you imagine how life could be different, how you could imagine a life that you don't think is possible now. And so every time, for me personally, every time a gala concert, a gala chorus has a concert or sings anything, and with every song that I choose to pick for the ensembles that I work with, whether they are mine or whether I have a small part in them, I have the glimmering ideal in the back of my mind that I'll be able to change at least one unsuspecting heart. That I'll be able to touch someone, and so they can view difference as an asset, or view perspective as something to be valued, or open up an avenue of communication and understanding or vision. Just give them something that niggles in the back of their mind when they go back to what they thought was true before. I hope it allows the audience members, as it does the chorus, to not be closed off, to come out, to be more aware, and to be less indifferent, just to open eyes, to see how all of us in gala choruses are able to be seen and share that ability with somebody else, to make them feel, hopefully, seen and in community. And so there was a time before Stonewall. There was a time before celebration and demonstration, before visibility and representation, before parades and pride, before Stonewall. We found each other, and we'll find each other still. Thank you.